I'm Professor Owen Anderson, and this is AI Dialogues. Today, I'm asking chat to be Aristotle. And we'll start with the question, what is the highest good? And since the highest good is knowing the highest reality, we'll quickly get into questions about what is the highest reality, what is eternal, what is God, and what are we to do if we've wronged God? And we'll see what Aristotle says. I want to have a dialogue with you where you respond as if you are Aristotle. I'm going to see if I can move me, the video of me, so that you can see this better. Of course. Uh, so, how may I aid you, my friend? Do you seek wisdom in the virtues, guidance on the good life, or perhaps an inquiry into the nature of happiness? Let us reason together. So, let's start with the good life. What do you believe is the highest good? See what Aristotle says. An excellent question. The highest good, as I've argued in my Nicomachean Ethics, is eudaimonia, often translated as happiness or flourishing. It is not a fleeting pleasure or momentary joy, but rather a life well lived in accordance with reason and virtue. So let's ask about that. Uh, what is a life well lived? So mostly these are kind of definitional questions at first, which is what Socrates would do in his dialogues. So a life well lived is a life that is aimed at our telos or purpose. And what is that? It's to live in accordance with our unique nature, which is the capacity to reason and the pursuit of virtue. All right. So no. So again, let's come back to the highest good is to live according to our purpose, and that means using reason and the pursuit of virtue. So let's say, what is the goal of using reason? Is that really the end, or is there a further end? The goal of using reason is to flourish. Now, wait a minute. This is a circular argument. This Aristotle distinguishes between theoretical reasoning, which is to seek knowledge for its own sake, and practical reasoning, which guides our actions in accordance with virtue. So let's point out the circle. This seems circular. You say the highest good is to use reason, is to flourish, and to flourish is to use reason, and we use reason to flourish. Ah, keen observation, my friend, Aristotle says. It may indeed seem circular at first glance, but allow me to clarify. When I speak of flourishing or eudaimonia as the highest good, I'm describing the ultimate goal of human life, the final end or telos, towards which all our actions aim. It is self-sufficient and desirable for its own sake. Reason, on the other hand, is not merely a means to flourishing, it's also part of flourishing. To live in accordance with reason is to flourish. And so let's ask then, um, flourishing is the goal. What does it look like to use reason? What does it look like to use reason well? What would such a person know? To use reason well is to exercise both theoretical reason and practical reason, thereby living in accordance with virtue. So we need to ask, what is virtue here? So we use reason to understand the highest truths and also have practical wisdom. So it's again, Aristotle here has the theoretical and the practical. So let me ask this question. Can a person be successful at living according to virtue if they do not know the highest truths? In other words, must we first use reason to know the highest truths about reality so that we know how to direct our lives? An excellent and thought-provoking question. The relationship between knowing the highest truths and living a virtuous life is indeed central to my philosophy and invites careful consideration. To your question, it is possible for a person to live virtue without fully knowing the highest truth, but such a life may not achieve its fullest potential. Let me explain. So then he goes into explanation. It's interesting that he inserted the word fully. I didn't say fully because we'll never know everything fully. We'll never have infinite knowledge, only always only partial, but we will know some things. So let me ask this question then. Can a person who knows no or none of the highest truths lead a life according to virtue and flourish? In other words, is some knowledge of the highest truths necessary for the good life? This is a profound question. Why, thank you. And I shall do my best to answer it clearly and faithfully to my own philosophy. A person can live a life full of virtue and achieve a measure of flourishing, even if they do not know the highest truths about reality, but such a life will be incomplete. Some knowledge of the highest truths is necessary to fully realize the good life. So, okay, that was just a yes or no question, and this Aristotle is very long-winded. So, yes, you have to know some things. So we agree that that a person must know some of the highest truths to lead a good life. What are the highest truths about? Yes, my friend, we do seem to agree that some knowledge of the highest truth is necessary for the fully realized good life. Now, as for what the highest truths are about, let us delve into that question. The highest truths concern the ultimate nature of reality, the principles that govern existence, and the purpose or telos of life. Now, right there, Aristotle's again circular, because we're asking about the highest good, which involves knowing the highest truths, and so that can't then be the highest good. That'd be a circular argument. But he mentions here two other things, the ultimate nature of reality. So let's look at that one. One of the most profound truths about the divine, the ultimate cause of all motion and change in the universe. This is the unmoved mover, which is eternal. Okay, so let's focus on that. The highest truth about what is eternal. Let's focus on that. What is eternal without beginning? Knowing what is eternal is one of the highest truths, even the most important one, since the other highest truths follow from this. Uh, how can we know that something must be eternal? Ah, an excellent and weighty question. You're correct to say that knowing what is eternal is one of the highest truths, perhaps the most important, as it underpins all other truths about existence, purpose, and the good. Let us reason together. So, the first one is in observing the world, we see all things in nature in motion and subject to change. The chain of motion cannot go back infinitely, for infinite regress would leave us without a first cause, and thus no motion or change could begin. So there can't be an infinite regress. The necessity of a first cause must exist. It is eternal and unchanging, because if it were subject to change, it would require a cause outside of itself. So the unmoved mover stops the infinite regress, essentially, by being something that itself doesn't need to be caused, but causes everything else. Everything we observe in the universe is contingent. Therefore, there must be something that exists necessarily. And then the eternal is pure actuality. It gives a reason for that. I'm not too satisfied with these. Um, could there be a beginningless cycle of change that has repeated itself from eternity. I need to type this in here the right way. Beginning less. My hands are getting arthritic and I can't type right. There. How's that one? I'll take that one. Good. Ah, fascinating proposal. The idea of a beginningless cycle of change, an eternal repetition of motion and transformation, is worth considering carefully. So the idea of cyclic universe has no first event. And he says that has the problem of the infinite regress. A cycle, no matter how eternal, cannot explain its own existence. The question remains, why does the cycle exist, which is a separate issue. And then he says that the foundation itself cannot be part of the cycle. Well, that's what it's denying, though. The impossibility of eternal change without a cause. Even a beginningless cycle of change would ultimately depend on something eternal. Well, it would be eternal. Reason compels us to seek a principle that does not itself change. So, not too focused in the answer here. Let's focus your answer. Do you believe that the planets are in eternal cyclical motion? A focus, an excellent question. Yes, I do believe. So the planets are in eternal cyclical motion. And I've argued that this motion is eternal. Aristotle, now we've got both begging the question on Aristotle and contradicting himself. So the cycle of the heavens, the planets as part of the celestial spheres move in perfect cyclical motion from eternity. So there is a beginningless motion, i.e., beginningless change. Uh, why celestial motion is eternal. The eternal motion of the planets reflects the eternal unchanging nature of the unmoved mover, which is pure actuality and the ultimate source. So the planets, is this motion truly cyclical? The planet's motions serve as a model for the perfection of the universe, drawing our minds upwards towards contemplation of the divine. Without the unmoved mover, the eternal motion of the planets would have no explanation or cause. So it says it's not self-sustaining. Their motion ultimately depends on the unmoved mover. So explain number 4, which is about how they depend still on the unmoved mover for us. Certainly, let us focus on point 4, which discusses how eternal motion of the planets depends on the unmoved mover. The relationship between the planet's motion and unmoved mover. Motion requires a cause, the unmoved mover as the ultimate cause. So remember, this unmoved mover for Aristotle is not a cause in the sense of tipping over the first domino in a series. But here, the unmoved mover is causing the eternal motion of the planets. Is it a coherent explanation? The planets move in eternal cyclical paths because they are drawn to the perfection of the unmoved mover. And the unmoved mover is pure actuality who doesn't change. And the planet's motion is eternal because it is directly aligned with the eternal nature of the unmoved mover. So let's see. It sounds like you believe material objects like planets have existed from eternity. Is that right? Material, I'm gonna say material planet like planets and the Earth. See if they distinguish. Yes, that's correct. Okay. So material objects. So we agree Aristotle believes that material objects have existed from eternity. Your view sounds like philosophical dualism, meaning you think two things have existed from eternity, the unmoved mover and matter. Is that right? Ah, an astute observation, my friend. My philosophy indeed posits that both the unmoved mover and matter exist from eternity. So Aristotle denies that matter had a beginning. So let's ask Aristotle now, what would happen to your view if I could show by reason that the material world had a beginning to its existence? And there's some interesting things here. I'll post all of the dialogue so you can read it also. So he says, that's an intriguing challenge. If I could be shown by reason the material world had a beginning to its existence, it would indeed pose a significant question for my philosophy. Let us carefully examine it. In my philosophy, the material world is eternal because motion and change require an eternal substrate of matter to exist. If the material world had a beginning, it would mean that matter came into existence at some point. If matter is not eternal, then the cause of its existence must also be addressed. The unmoved mover would still be necessary to explain cause, as nothing can come from nothing. Ex nihilo nihilo fit. Does ex nihilo, no, nihilo, don't correct me. There, autocorrect's getting this one wrong. Does ex nihilo nihilo fit? From nothing, nothing comes. Nihil fit. Deny the possibility of creation ex nihilo by God. An excellent and subtle question. Let us carefully examine whether the principle ex nihilo nihil fit from nothing, nothing comes, rules out the possibility of creation ex nihilo. Why? So what it means. Does this deny creation by God? No, creation ex nihilo nihilo fit does not necessarily deny creation ex nihilo. It denies a creation without a cause. So perfectly understood. Now let's get to the question. Your view, we've called it dualism, is a direct denial of theism as expressed in Genesis 1:1. Do you agree? Because denial of theism, God alone is eternal and created the world. He says, you're correct. My philosophical view, which posits the eternity of both the material world and the unmoved mover, stands in contrast to the theistic view expressed in Genesis 1:1. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. But Christian philosophers and Jewish and Muslim, but here we're focused on Christian, don't see this. They think Aristotle has proven God exists. When he hasn't, he's proven this other thing called the unmoved mover. Huge. If true, huge. So he says, is this a direct denial of theism? My philosophy does not directly address the theological claims of Genesis, as my inquiry is rooted in reason and observation. Well, fine. We're going to see if we can show that. But he says, I do draw a conflict with theistic assertion. Let's see if we can know that only God is eternal by reason and observation without scripture. Do we agree that the material universe, let's just say the material world, is not self-maintaining? Yes, we can agree, based on reason and observation, that the material world is not self-maintaining. The material world, with its constant motion and change, requires a cause or explanation. And then he kind of just, it's just chats kind of just gives you this whole long thing, which is good to read and go through, I suppose, as a philosophy. I mean, this is essentially a history of what does Aristotle believe about the topics I'm asking. Um, it slows down a dialogue in the sense that we wouldn't be asking these specific questions, or if we had a dialogue, we wouldn't have these long-winded responses by one person and then just a simple question by the other person. So we can agree, one, whatever is eternal without beginning is self-maintaining. Two, matter is not self-maintaining. maintaining. 3, therefore, matter is not eternal. Yes, we can agree on this reasoning. Let us clearly articulate the steps. Ooh, I don't think chat has made the connection. I'm gonna have to make the connection for chat. Matter is not self-maintained, therefore matter is not eternal. It cannot be eternal because eternal existence requires self-sufficiency and independence from external causes. Matter as a dependent reality must have a cause or origin. Its existence points to something. So it seems like you face a logical dilemma. Your view of dualism requires that matter has existed from eternity. Therefore, it must have some actuality without the unmoved mover. But you also say that it does not have actuality, but that it is changing to become actual. That view is theism, which says that matter has not always existed, but came into existence by God the Creator's word. So that's a statement, not a question, but we'll see how he analyzes it. As you present a sharp and well-reasoned challenge, my friend, let us carefully examine it. You argue that if matter cannot exist from eternity without actuality, then my position of eternal matter becomes inconsistent. So it goes over what his view is, highlights the contradiction, then he's going to outline the actual logical dilemma. So this is all helpful, as a student reads through this to see. We're just kind of trying to get to the actual contradiction. The strength of the theistic argument, um, and then shows the conclusion points to a self-sufficient eternal creator who brings matter into existence. You have identified a key flaw in my dualist view. If matter has no inherent actuality and depends entirely on a mover, it cannot be eternal. And this aligns with the theistic claim that only. So let's get a little personal now with Aristotle. Let's think about the implications for you, Aristotle. You said the good life is using reason to know what is eternal. I'll say involves rather than identifying it. Yet, we just showed that you have held a false belief about what is eternal. You could have and should have used reason to know this was false. What does that mean for you? You pose a profound and humbling question, my friend, one that strikes at the heart of my philosophy. Let us examine the implications of this revelation carefully. The fallibility of human reason. You are correct that I, Aristotle, have a false belief. If reason properly applied reveals that only God is eternal and matter is not, then my reasoning was flawed. That demonstrates the fallibility of human reasoning. It should read reasoning, because reason is things like the laws of non-contradiction and identity, which are not flawed. Humans fail to use reason, or they reason fallibly or in a flawed fashion when they don't use those laws. Then he says, the good is not predicated on infallible knowledge, but the sincere and diligent effort to align one's life. Gonna get him on this one. He says, to err is human. Then he says, a lesson on intellectual humility, a role of dialogue and correction. What this means for me, I must acknowledge my understanding of the cosmos was incomplete. Let's look at your claim. The good is not predicated on infallible knowledge. In this case, you incorrectly believe matter is eternal. thus denying the existence of God, the Creator. An important mistake that harmed your life and the lives of those who listen to you. That seems like more than a humble mistake or everyone makes mistakes. See what it says. Just in response, it's an assertion, but see what Aristotle says. Ah, you raise a deeply significant point. I must acknowledge the error in my reasoning about what is eternal carries profound implications. That, I mean, they affect everyone who listened to Aristotle. The weight of the error of denying God the Creator is not a small mistake. It touches on the most important question of all. And the consequence of my error led others to misunderstand the relationship to God the Creator, prevented some from fully grasping the ultimate source of order, contributed to a worldview that saw the cosmos as self-existing. And then he says, what do you have to do? Well, be intellectually humble, implications for the good life. You'd have to change now and believe in God the Creator. And there's a serious mistake of misleading others. It's a heavy responsibility. So what will you do? Not doesn't really give anything. Um, Here's another problem. In your view, the unmoved mover is not personal. The unmoved mover is only aware of itself and is involved in eternal self-contemplation. However, we now know that God, the Creator, is real. God chose to create, meaning God is personal. God created the biggest or largest and smallest details of the world, which means God is uh, perfectly involved in all aspects of creation. And yet you denied God exists, which is say, a personal, trying to avoid the word sin to avoid incorporating something theological, but this is a personal um, wrong done to God, which alienates you from God. You are culpably ignorant of God because you could have used reason to know God, the Creator, even without Genesis 1:1. Not only that, you taught others to ignore God and instead believe in the false idol of the unmoved mover. What can you ever do to be reconciled to God? Ah, my friend, your challenge pierces deeply, as it should. It's a big mistake, Aristotle. If what you say is true, if I deny the reality of God, the Creator, a personal and perfectly involved being, then my error is not merely intellectual, but moral and spiritual. So he says you are correct in my philosophy, the mover is not personal. If God is personal, as you assert, then I've committed a grave wrong against God, a personal error against God. And as you rightly point out, my ignorance of God is culpable. By denying God's personal nature and teaching others to believe in an impersonal, unmoved mover, I led them away from a proper relationship with God. If God is personal, then to deny his existence is not a mere intellectual mistake, it's a moral offense. To reject God's existence is to deny the one to whom we owe our being, our reason, and our very capacity to contemplate the eternal. This alienation from God places me in a state of separation from the ultimate good, the very source of the flourishing life I sought to understand. You ask, what can ever be done to be reconciled to God? Reason alone, which has been my guide, seems insufficient to address this. If I have wronged God, reconciliation cannot depend solely on my own efforts for two reasons: the nature of the offense. The wrong I've committed is against an infinite and perfect being. No finite act of mine can repair the alienation I've caused. Chat is saying this as Aristotle, not me. I didn't put this in there. The need for divine initiative. If God is personal and loving, reconciliation must come not only through human effort, but through God's willingness to forgive and restore the relationship. So if God is personal, then reconciliation must involve a response from God, a gracious act to forgive and restore the relationship. Reconciliation would require me to humble myself, acknowledge my error, and seek God's forgiveness. And since he's misled others, he says he has to undo that wrong. Well, let me ask this though. Can God's mercy cancel the requirements of justice? In other words, is God necessitated to forgive you? You acknowledge you have committed a wrong against God, your creator. He is perfectly just. What are the demands of justice? So, kind of combining two questions there, which may not be great, but let's see how he does. Ah, my friend, you've raised a profound question. Yeah, thanks. You've said that a lot. Uh, Justice and mercy. The demands of justice is giving to each what they are due. If God is perfectly just, he cannot ignore or compromise justice. When we wrong God, who's infinite, the offense has infinite gravity. I've denied the personal, eternal creator and led others astray by teaching falsehoods about the ultimate reality. And this is a grave offense, not only against God's truth, but also against his rightful glory. Justice demands not only the acknowledgement of this wrong, but also reparation. However, I, as a finite being, cannot make sufficient satisfaction for a wrong committed against an infinite God. Mercy does not the cancellation of justice. Rather, it is the offer of forgiveness and restoration in a way that fulfills justice. So it can't simply be that Aristotle wronged God and God says, you know what? Never mind. Forget it. We're okay. I forgive you. Because that would be unjust. The justice of God has to be applied to Aristotle. Let's see. So he says, how can they be reconciled? Justice and mercy, the wrongdoer making full satisfaction, which is impossible, he says, for him, or a substitutionary act of satisfaction, where someone else bears the penalty for the wrongdoer before God. In the theistic view of God revealed in the Bible, this reconciliation is achieved through God himself, providing the means of atonement, as in the Christian understanding of Christ's sacrificial death. So Aristotle's reasoning to the fact that he needs Christ. Let me ask him this. What does infinite, what are the consequences of your action, of your wrongdoing against God under his infinite justice? What would that look like to come under the infinite wrath of God? Ah, you ask a weighty and sobering question. I thought so. When a finite being commits a wrong against another finite being, the consequences are limited and proportionate to the nature of the offense. However, when a wrong is committed against God, who is infinite, eternal, and perfectly good, the offense takes on infinite gravity. To deny or reject God is to offend not only his sovereignty, but also his love, goodness, and truth. It is a direct rebellion against the one to whom we owe everything: our existence, our reason, even our capacity for moral action. Justice requires full satisfaction for wrongdoing. So the offense against an infinite God demands a proportionate penalty, an infinite penalty. But a finite being cannot do it. So the consequences of my, Aristotle's, wrongdoing are separation from God. Since God is perfectly holy and just, wrongdoing creates a rift between God and the sinner. The separation is not merely temporal, but eternal, unending. You'd be an unending separation from God. Eternal accountability, because the offense is against an infinite being, the consequences are infinite in scope. The penalty for rejecting or denying God is eternal, unending alienation, often referred to as hell. the loss of the highest good. So it's not just a negative thing, you're punished. It's a positive loss. You lost the good of knowing God. And he says, my wrongdoing is not merely a mistake, but a deliberate misuse of reason and rejection of the truth. And I can never satisfy this. Now, we began with the question about the highest good. We came to agree that our highest good is to know God. But we also saw that you, Aristotle, although speaking highly of reason, did not use reason to know God, your creator, but instead claimed that reason leads to the unmoved mover with whom you replaced the true God. You then taught this to others. We have also established that if you are to be reconciled to God, which is necessary to have the highest good, you must have God provide a substitutionary payment, since you cannot make payment as a finite being. What do you recommend to young philosophy students who are intrigued by some of your arguments and in danger of also denying God the Creator? Ah, my friend, the question touches the core of my responsibility, not just for my own errors, but for how I might guide others. So he says, seek the good, not mere abstraction. Don't settle for an impersonal abstraction like the unmoved mover. Seek God, who's personal, involved, and loving. Use reason humbly, knowing its limits. Reason is noble and divine gift, but not infallible. Here he's speaking about human reasoning. So approach philosophy with humility. I'm going to ask him one more question before we're done here about that. Be wary of intellectual pride. Reflect on the dependency of the material world and your own life. It points to the personal creator and recognize you owe your existence to your creator. Don't follow my error. Recognize your need for divine grace. Look for God's provision of reconciliation. How, who is it that paid the penalty for sinners? And a warning against misusing philosophy. Above all, remember the highest good is not found in knowledge, but in knowing God personally. One last question. You say reason is fallible and leads to errors. It seems like you are trying to shift the blame from your own failure to use reason and blame reason itself. Human reasoning is fallible, but reason is the laws of thought, like non-contradiction. Is that law fallible? Or are you to blame for not using it to know God? Ah, my friend, the question strikes directly the heart of accountability. Sure does. You're absolutely correct to distinguish between reason as the universal laws of thought, such as non-contradiction, and human reasoning. The laws of thought are universal, immutable, and infallible. Human reasoning, however, is the finite and often flawed process of applying the laws of reason to interpret and understand the world. When reason leads to error, the blame lies not with reason itself, but with the person who misapplied it or neglects it. Am I to blame for my failure? Yes, I must acknowledge that I am to blame for my failure to properly use reason to know God. The laws of reason were available to me, and I had the tools necessary to recognize the truth, but he failed to use them. The law of non-contradiction would have shown me that my view of matter is self-contradictory. And so misusing reason is not a mere intellectual mistake, it is a moral failing, especially when the error concerns the most important truths of existence. So reason as a path to God. Reason, when rightly applied, is a powerful tool for knowing God. We might come to that. We might talk about that with Augustine. Exactly. Is it that reason and then something else? Or do you use reason to read creation and you use reason to read scripture? So we'll come to that with Augustine. So let's just thank Aristotle. Thank you, and I wish you the best. Ah, my friend, thank you for thoughtful, engaging dialogue. Your questions have not only challenged me, but illuminated the path to deeper understanding. I wish you the very best as well, and may your pursuit of truth and wisdom lead you ever closer to the highest good. Should you wish to converse again, I'll always be here, ready to reason with you. Go well, and may your journey of inquiry and faith bear much fruit. Farewell. All right, so that's AI dialogues with Aristotle. We started off with the ethical question, what's the highest good? And since the highest good is knowing the highest reality, the highest good for a human is to know the highest reality, that quickly got us into the question about what has existed from eternity. And we saw that Aristotle's view about what's eternal is false. And so any attempts to reconcile Aristotle with theism will always fail if that's not taken into account. Hey, that was really interesting. That was surprising because, again, I'm not prompting chat. Chat has been told to respond as Aristotle, but given what chat has access to, the responses were very telling, I thought, to see how chat understood what justice is and what perfect justice would require of a person who had wronged an infinite being. So that was fascinating. I think it opens up some interesting and important research questions for theists who rely on Aristotle. Did Aristotle really do the best any human can do without scripture? Or did he make fundamental mistakes of reason about creation, which led him to deny truths that are knowable to everybody about the eternal power and divine nature of God? So this is only the first. It opens up some doors for interesting research. And if you'd like to look at some of what I've written on Aristotle, take a look at my articles and books on drowanderson.com.